single footprint lies pressed into stone. Its edges are soft, now worn down by dust and centuries of silence, but the shape is unmistakable. A heel. Toes. A moment when flesh met earth and the world was still young enough to remember it. Run your mind across its surface. It is cold. It is patient. It has been waiting longer than language, longer than names, longer than the idea of history itself. Around it, shadow gathers. Nothing moves. Even time seems to hold its breath. Something older than choice has drawn you to this moment. A rhythm buried beneath calendars and clocks. A pulse that existed before cities learned how to rise, before stone learned how to become walls. You did not find this story. It remembered you. Across generations through ash, and forgetting memory has a way of calling back those willing to listen. What if civilization is not a straight line carved forward through time, but a circle traced again and again through loss and return? What if the myths we inherited are not inventions but echoes, not fantasies but fragments of lived experience, shaped by trauma carried through story, because stone and paper could not survive the fall? Floods, fires, teachers from the sky, golden ages reduced to whispers. These patterns appear too often in too many places to be coincidence. Perhaps forgetting was never failure. Perhaps it was protection. A necessary silence after a world learned too much too quickly. Stone remembers even when people do not. So does dust. So does shadow. Beneath every monument and every myth lies the same quiet suggestion that something ancient once understood the rhythm of the world, and that understanding did not die. It went dormant. It waits in geometry and ritual, in the strange familiarity you feel when old stories sound true before they make sense. Stay with me. Let's drift a little deeper. The night begins in a place where sound thins out and temperature becomes a language of its own. Imagine a rainforest long after midnight where the air is warm but heavy, pressing gently against the skin like a held breath. Moisture hangs between leaves, turning moonlight into something soft and diffused, a pale dust drifting downward rather than a beam. Every surface is textured. Bark ridges flake beneath unseen fingers of time moss. Cushions stone like a memory trying to be kind, and the ground gives slightly underfoot layered with centuries of fallen growth. Nothing here is in a hurry. Even decay moves slowly, methodically, as if it understands that permanence is not resistance but patience. Beneath this canopy the earth speaks quietly. Roots press through soil the way thoughts press through sleep, not urgently but inevitably. Water slips downward through unseen channels, carrying minerals, grain by grain dissolving what once seemed solid. In geology, this is called percolation. In poetry, it is forgetting. The forest does not preserve history the way books do. It absorbs it. Every floodplain, every fallen trunk, every compressed layer of loam is an archive written without letters. Erosion is time thinking. Gravity is memory pulling everything back toward where it began. Now let the forest dissolve into darkness and feel the temperature fall. Ice replaces leaf. Wind replaces breath. We are standing on the edge of a glacier, its surface creaking softly, not from movement but from pressure, the low complaint of weight remembering itself. The cold here is not sharp. It is enveloping. It seeps inward, slowing the body, thickening the blood, narrowing attention, until only sensation remains. Under this ice lie landscapes preserved without mercy. Valleys, rivers, grasslands frozen mid-sentence. The glacier is not dead. It is a slow machine grinding continents down to powder while carrying the past intact inside its body. When ice advances, it does not discriminate. It erases footprints and cities with equal indifference, scraping memory flat and redistributing it elsewhere. Stones carried hundreds of kilometers forget their origins smoothed into strangers. This is how the earth edits itself, not violently but thoroughly. What remains after a glacial retreat is not absence but silence. A silence so complete it feels intentional. In that silence myths are born. Myths are humans standing on newly exposed land watching meltwater rush into the sea, would not have spoken of climate oscillations or orbital mechanics. They would have spoken of floods, of endings, of gods inhaling and exhaling the world. Drift now beneath the water, where light loses its colour and pressure replaces sky. The ocean at depth is not empty. It is dense with presence. Cold presses in from all sides. Sound travels farther here, slower, bending around unseen forms. The seafloor is a library of collapsed epochs. Shorelines that once felt sun now lie buried under silt. Coral grows on ruins without knowing what they were. Sediment settles like snow layer upon layer, each one a year, a decade, a millennium laid gently atop the last. This is how evidence accumulates, not as revelation but as weight. In the language of geology, the seabed is calm only because its violence has already passed. Subduction zones hum beneath it, recycling crust back into heat, turning continents into vapour over timescales too large for fear. Volcanoes sleep, faults remember. Every so often the earth shifts in its rest, and the water above responds with sudden motion. To those who lived near ancient coasts, such movements would have felt like judgment. Walls of water do not announce themselves as physics. They arrive as myth, as consequence, as the feeling that something vast has noticed you. Night gathers all of this into coherence. Under a dark sky, distinctions blur. Forest, ice, ocean, desert become expressions of the same system, breathing at different speeds. The stars overhead seem fixed, but they too are in motion, drifting slowly, altering their arrangements so gradually that only stone remembers their former places. The silence of night is not empty. It is full of long processes continuing without witnesses. This is the hour when memory loosens its grip on sequence and begins to think in patterns instead. Ancient people understood this hour instinctively. Without instruments, without charts, they learned the weight of darkness. Firelight was small. Beyond it the world felt infinite and alive. In such conditions, stories did not compete with distraction. They synchronized with the environment. The rhythm of speech matched the rhythm of waves of wind through grass of ice, shifting under pressure. Knowledge entered the body through repetition, through cadence, through listening rather than accumulation. The atmosphere itself became the teacher. What we call the first civilization, if it existed, would have been born into this intimacy with process, not separate from geology but embedded within it. They would have felt the land change before measuring it. They would have sensed cycles before naming them. When that world altered, when coastlines drowned and ice returned or vanished, the memory of it would not have survived as data. It would have survived as feeling, as reverence, as warning folded into story. And so the atmosphere matters, not as scenery, but as the medium through which memory first learned how to travel. Stone cools at night, water deepens, ice groans softly. Under all of it, the earth continues its slow work indifferent to names patient beyond measure. This is where the story begins again. Not with people, but with place. Not with facts, but with the conditions that make remembering possible. Evidence does not arrive like revelation. It settles. It drifts downward through time, the way fine silt sinks through still water grain by grain until a surface becomes a layer, and a layer becomes a record. In the quiet language of geology, truth is never shouted. It accumulates. A core drilled from the earth's skin tells its story without words, ash-trapped between bands of ice pollen pressed flat in ancient mud bubbles of air sealed like held breath. Each one is a sentence written by gravity. Each one says the same thing in different dialects. The world has changed before, and it did not do so gently. Ice sheets advanced and retreated like slow lungs, inhaling continents, exhaling oceans. Shorelines walked inland. Rivers forgot their old paths. What we call catastrophe, the earth calls adjustment. To study deep time is to learn patience. The numbers are too large to hold all at once, so the mind learns to move slowly. Sea level did not rise in a single moment at the end of the Ice Age. It rose in pulses, sudden accelerations, recorded in coral terraces and drowned valleys. Moments when meltwater surged so fast that coastlines disappeared within a few human lifetimes. A village built near the water would not have seen a graph. It would have seen the tide refuse to leave. It would have felt the ground grow salty. It would have watched the horizon approach. Science measures this in meters per century. Memory would have measured it in loss. Both are correct. Data is what happened. Memory is how it felt. The evidence is scattered because the event was global, but the experience was local. In one place, fire. In another, flood. In another, wind that did not stop for years. Ice cores from Greenland preserved dark bands of soot, microscopic charcoal from forests that burned suddenly and extensively. Beneath them, a sharp boundary where temperature plunged and then rose again with violent speed. Sediment layers from lakes across multiple continents show the same signature disruption. Then calm, then a different world settling into place. To a geologist, this is climate instability. To a people living through it, this would have been the end of the rules they understood. The sky no longer behaved. The seasons arrived out of order. Animals vanished or moved without warning. Stability once assumed dissolved. Archaeology enters this story quietly, almost reluctantly. It does not like speculation. It prefers fragments that can be held, stone tools found beneath flood sediments, hearths buried under marine clay, fish traps now resting far inland or deep underwater. Along continental shelves, sonar reveals ancient river systems cut when sea levels were lower braided landscapes where people once lived because water and food converged there. These were not marginal places, they were optimal. When the sea rose, these landscapes vanished first, taking with them whatever structures were made of wood fibre skin or memory. Stone survives because it resists forgetting. Most of life does not. Absence in this context is not proof of non-existence. It is the expected outcome of submersion. There is a temptation to believe that complexity leaves obvious scars that a sophisticated society must announce itself with ruins impossible to miss. But geology teaches another lesson. Pressure erases detail. Time smooths edges. A mountain range can be reduced to sand. A city built of earth and timber would leave almost nothing after 12,000 years of rising seas shifting sediments and biological churn. What remains is indirect, patterns without names, anomalies that do not fit the assumed tempo of progress, sites that appear suddenly already fluent in stone, already aligned with sky and season, as if remembering something rather than inventing it. Radiocarbon dates do not lie, but they do not explain themselves either. They tell us when something last lived, not why it was built the way it was. When massive stone enclosures appear earlier than agriculture, earlier than settled life is supposed to exist, the data does not panic. Humans do. The evidence simply sits there, patient, waiting for interpretation to catch up. Stratigraphy shows long periods of apparent quiet, followed by bursts of construction organization symbolism. Not gradual improvement, but punctuation. As if knowledge surfaced, was expressed intensely, then submerged again. Biology contributes its own slow testimony. Genetic bottlenecks hint at periods when human populations shrank dramatically, reduced to scattered groups that later expanded. This is not myth. It is written in DNA in reduced variation followed by sudden branching. Something happened that compressed humanity into survival mode. Survival changes priorities. When the world becomes unstable, continuity matters more than innovation. Memory becomes a burden and a necessity at the same time. Too much remembering hurts. Too little destroys identity. The compromise is story. Not exact, but durable. Even the distribution of myths behaves like evidence when viewed without haste. Flood narratives cluster along ancient coastlines. Fire from the sky stories appear near regions with impact proxies. Tales of lost lands concentrate where continental shelves would have been exposed during lower sea levels. This is not proof in the courtroom sense, it is correlation. But geology is built on correlation. So is climate science. So is reconstruction of any past too vast to witness directly. When independent lines of data converge, the shape of an event begins to appear even if its face remains hidden. Night is the right time to sit with this kind of evidence. In darkness, the urge to resolve softens. The mind becomes receptive to scale. Outside, the Earth continues its slow work. Rocks cool, plates drift a few millimeters. Gravity keeps everything where it belongs. The planet is not fragile, it is patient. Human certainty is the thin layer on top, easily disturbed. Evidence does not demand belief. It invites humility. It asks only that we notice how often the past contradicts our sense of uniqueness. If ancient myths are memories, then the evidence does not need to shout. It only needs to persist. Temperature spike in ice, a drowned valley beneath the sea. A story that appears in too many places to be coincidence. Together they form something like a landscape seen in fog. You cannot see every detail, but you can feel the slope. You know which direction the ground is leaning. The earth has reset before. People were there when it happened. And they carried something forward, not in stone or metal, but in rhythm and warning, and the quiet instinct that the world can change faster than anyone expects. This is not a conclusion. It is a foundation. Evidence in deep time does not close questions. It opens them slowly the way night opens into sleep. What lies beneath the sediment is not certainty but possibility, layered thick enough to rest on. And as the dark settles more fully around the present moment, the data remains unmoving, waiting for the next breath of interpretation to pass over it, the next memory to surface, the next pattern to be noticed. An anomaly is not a discovery. It is a hesitation. In science, it appears as a number that refuses to settle, a measurement that drifts outside expectation, a layer of stone that feels out of place beneath the fingers. It is the moment when the earth, usually so patient in its explanations, goes quiet instead of answering. In the deep night of inquiry, anomalies are like cold drafts moving through an otherwise sealed room. You do not see them at first. You feel them. A subtle sense that the story you're telling yourself about the world is missing a weight, a pressure, something unaccounted for. Consider the ground beneath your feet. Geological layers are meant to behave like memory, arranged politely oldest at the bottom, youngest at the top, each one resting on the last in a predictable order. This is how we read time in stone. And yet again and again the earth disrupts this clarity. There are places where advanced structures appear too early, where stone has been cut with precision, before metallurgy is supposed to exist, where massive blocks have been moved and aligned, without the tools our timelines allow. These are not dramatic contradictions, they are small fractures, hairline cracks in certainty, enough to let doubt seep in. In archaeology, these cracks are often sealed quickly, not out of dishonesty but out of necessity. Coherence is a survival instinct of the mind. When faced with data that does not fit, we adjust the data, not the frame. A structure is redated. A carving is labelled symbolic. A precision alignment is called coincidence. This is how intellectual erosion works, not through destruction but through smoothing. Sharp questions are worn down until they no longer cut. But erosion, like memory, leaves traces, and sometimes those traces gather. Take the oldest monumental sites on Earth. They do not rise gradually from simplicity. They appear suddenly complex, confident, as if the builders already knew what they were doing. Göbekli Tepe stands like this in the archaeological record, not as an answer, but as a question carved into limestone. Tens of thousands of tons of stone shaped, lifted and arranged by people who, according to conventional models, had not yet invented agriculture. The anomaly is not the stones themselves. It is the implication, knowledge without apparent preparation, effect without visible cause. This pattern repeats elsewhere. In the Andes, at places like Pumapunku, stone blocks interlock with tolerances tighter than a human hair. Their angles are precise, their symmetry deliberate. The rock itself is hard to work even with modern tools, and yet it was shaped long before iron or steel. The usual explanation is lost technique, extraordinary labour or ritual exaggeration. But those explanations circle the anomaly without entering it. They describe how something might have been done, not why such capability appears, and then vanishes. Anomalies also surface in the sky. Ancient structures across the world align with celestial events that require long-term observation, solstices, equinoxes, processional cycles that unfold over thousands of years. To recognize them, one must watch patiently, record mentally, and transmit knowledge across generations. This implies institutions of memory older than writing. Yet our models often treat early societies as transient, fragile, reactive. The stones suggest otherwise. They suggest continuity. They suggest inheritance. Inheritance is the quietest anomaly of all. In biology, traits persist even when environments change. In culture, patterns do the same. Symbols recur where contact seems impossible. Flood myths echo across continents. Serpents, trees, circles, and stars appear again and again not as decoration but as structure. These repetitions are often dismissed as universal archetypes, products of the shared human mind. That explanation is tidy, perhaps too tidy. It assumes similarity without transmission. It explains pattern by coincidence rather than continuity. But the Earth rarely works by coincidence alone. Rivers carve similar shapes because gravity behaves the same everywhere, but they do so through connection, not randomness. If myths share structure, if architecture shares proportion, if cosmology shares rhythm, then the anomaly may not be why they are similar, but why we expect them to be different. We have assumed isolation where the past may have known circulation. Knowledge, like sediment, can travel far from its source before settling. There is also the anomaly of absence. Entire coastlines that once supported life now lie beneath the sea. During the last ice age, sea levels were over 100 meters lower than today. Vast regions now drowned would have been fertile, stable, and inhabited for thousands of years. When the ice melted, those worlds disappeared, quietly erased not by fire but by water. Archaeology, bound mostly to dry land, rarely looks there. This creates a blind spot, a silence mistaken for emptiness. What happens to memory when its physical anchors vanish? It does not disappear. It migrates. It compresses. It turns inward. Survivors move inland, carrying stories instead of structures. The anomaly, then, is not that we lack evidence of early complexity. It is that we expect evidence to remain where the land itself did not. The ocean is not just water. It is a lid placed gently over chapters of history we have not yet learned how to read. In geology, anomalies often lead to breakthroughs. A rock layer out of sequence can reveal tectonic upheaval. A fossil in the wrong place can rewrite evolutionary trees, but only if the anomaly is allowed to remain unresolved long enough to be examined. In cultural history, we are less patient. We prefer closure. We prefer timelines that move cleanly from ignorance to enlightenment. Anomalies threaten that comfort. They imply regression, loss, forgetting on a civilizational scale. The idea of a first civilization lives precisely in this discomfort. It is not supported by a single definitive artifact. It emerges instead from accumulation of irregularities, too early knowledge, too sudden sophistication, too consistent myth, too much missing land. Each on its own is explainable. Together they hum, a low-frequency vibration beneath the narrative of progress. Like standing on stone that resonates when struck, you feel that something hollow lies beneath. Night is the proper time for such realizations. In darkness, the mind is less defensive. It loosens its grip on certainty. The same way shadows soften the edges of objects, sleep softens the edges of belief. An anomaly does not demand belief. It asks for attention. It asks you to pause your conclusions and listen to the silence between them. That silence is not empty. It is full of unresolved data waiting to be noticed. If ancient myths are memories, then anomalies are their fingerprints in the physical world, smudged, partial, hard to interpret, but unmistakably human. They suggest not fantasy, but compression. The way trauma survives as symbol, the way knowledge survives as ritual, the way understanding survives when explanation is lost. The anomaly, then, is not a flaw in history. It is history speaking in a different register. And like all quiet voices, it is easiest to hear when everything else slows down. Silence is not emptiness. In geology, silence is a boundary, a place where the record thins and the signal fades, where time continues to pass but leaves fewer marks behind. There are layers in the earth where almost nothing seems to happen. Long stretches of stone that tell no dramatic story, and then abruptly a disruption, a gap, an unconformity. Millions of years missing between two surfaces that touch as if no time passed at all. This is not an error. It is erosion. Time thinking, slowly deciding what to keep and what to let go. Human history has its own unconformities, places where centuries should be but are not. These are the quiet zones of the past, the intervals where writing does not speak and monuments do not rise. We often describe them as dark ages, but darkness implies absence of light, not absence of life. People were there. They hunted, gathered, raised children, buried their dead. What they did not do or could not do was leave marks that survived the pressure of time. Wood rots, fibre dissolves, earth returns to earth. Only stone remembers well, and even stone forgets eventually. Silence, then, is not the lack of story. It is the loss of medium. In historical timelines, silence is uncomfortable. It resists narration. Between the end of the Ice Age and the rise of the first recognized civilizations lies a stretch of thousands of years where the record grows thin. Tools exist, but not cities. Art exists, but not architecture. Knowledge exists, but not in forms we easily recognize. This gap has often been treated as a waiting room, a place where humanity was preparing to become itself. But preparation is an assumption. The silence does not tell us what people were doing. It only tells us what did not survive. Geology teaches caution here. When a coastline submerges, it does not announce its loss. It slides under water grain by grain, taking its settlements with it. The most productive human environments, river mouths, deltas, fertile plains near the sea, are also the most vulnerable to rising waters. If a complex society existed there, its remains would now lie beneath meters of sediment, pressed flat by currents and time. The silence we hear may be the ocean breathing over forgotten ground. There is also the silence of interruption. Trauma silences as effectively as erosion. When environments collapse rapidly, cultures shift from expression to survival. Long-term projects end, knowledge becomes dangerous, the future shrinks. In such moments, memory does not disappear, but it changes form. It moves from instruction to caution, from technique to taboo. Stories replace explanations, ritual replaces record. Silence settles over what cannot be safely repeated. Archaeology encounters this silence as absence of continuity. Techniques appear, then vanish. Styles emerge fully formed, then disappear for centuries. There is no smooth evolution to trace only isolated peaks separated by valleys of missing information. These valleys are often explained away as developmental gaps, periods when humanity was simply less capable. But this interpretation assumes that capability only increases. It ignores the possibility of loss. In nature, loss is common. Species forget adaptations when environments change. Glaciers erase valleys they once carved. Memory, whether biological or cultural, is always selective. Silence also exists in the written record itself. The earliest texts we possess already speak of older times. They refer to golden ages, previous worlds, eras of gods and heroes. Writing begins late, and when it does, it looks backward. This suggests that the silence preceding it was not empty, but crowded with stories already old. Writing did not create memory. It attempted to capture what was already fading. In that sense, the first texts are not beginnings, they are salvage. When historians encounter these references, they often interpret them as myth, metaphor, or invention. This is reasonable. Writing emerged alongside power, and power reshapes memory to serve order. But myth persists even when power changes. It crosses borders. It survives translation. Its persistence suggests that it was doing a job writing could not yet do. It was carrying information through silence. Not exact information, but durable information. The kind that can survive when details cannot. Silence also appears in the body. Genetic studies reveal bottlenecks where human populations shrank dramatically, followed by expansions. These events leave little cultural trace beyond survival itself, yet they align with climatic disruptions evident in ice cores and sediments. The Earth remembers. The genome remembers. Culture more fragile often does not, or remembers differently. A story of a flood is easier to carry than a chart of sea level rise. A tale of angry gods is easier than a lesson in climate instability. Silence forces translation. In the quiet between records, there is often an assumption of simplicity, but simplicity is a projection. The absence of visible complexity does not mean complexity was absent. It means it was expressed in ways that did not fossilize. Knowledge of plants, stars, seasons, and stone can exist entirely in the body and the voice. Such knowledge leaves few traces unless it is encoded deliberately into durable forms. Silence may indicate not ignorance but intimacy, a way of knowing that does not separate observer from world. Night amplifies this perspective. In darkness, the landscape loses its sharp edges. Distances become uncertain. Sounds carry farther. The mind becomes attuned to subtlety. Silence reveals layers rather than erasing them. The same is true of the past. When we stop demanding clear answers, the quiet begins to speak. It speaks of continuity without documentation, of people moving through changing worlds, adapting, carrying fragments forward because that was all that could be carried. If there was a first civilization, its most vulnerable legacy would not be its buildings, but its coherence, the understanding of how things fit together. That is the first thing lost in catastrophe. Techniques can be relearned, materials can be found again. But coherence once broken takes generations to restore. Silence would follow such a break, not because nothing happened, but because meaning scattered. What remained would be pieces without a frame. This is why the silence matters. It is not a void to be filled with speculation, but a signal of disruption. A reminder that history is not continuous narration, but a patchwork stitched across gaps. The earth itself is stitched this way. So are our memories. What we call forgetting is often just memory changing shape. The silence between chapters is where that change happens. As the night deeper, silence becomes less threatening. It becomes a space to rest in, a pause rather than an end. The past does not rush to explain itself. It waits, and in waiting it invites a different kind of listening. One that does not expect words but recognizes patterns in their absence. One that understands that what is missing can be as meaningful as what remains. The silence is not the end of the story. It is the place where the story went underground, gathering strength, waiting for the conditions to change. There is a moment in deep time when the earth feels unfamiliar, not because it was alien, but because it no longer exists in any complete form. This is the forgotten epoch, a span of human presence that does not sit comfortably inside our timelines. It is not named in textbooks. It does not announce itself with dates. It lives between layers, between certainties, like a shoreline erased and redrawn so many times that its original shape can no longer be traced. To enter this epoch is to let go of the need for definition and accept atmosphere instead. A world quieter than ours, yet more attentive. Slower, yet more aware of consequence. Picture a coast at the end of the Ice Age. Not the dramatic ice walls of imagination, but a gentler scene. Broad plains stretching toward a distant horizon. Rivers braided and calm. Forests young but spreading. The air cool, heavy with moisture, carrying the smell of stone warming after long cold centuries. People live here not in cities as we imagine them, but in networks. Seasonal movement. Knowledge carried in bodies and voices rather than walls. The ground beneath them is stable enough to trust, and the sky above is watched carefully because it governs everything. This epoch does not need grand monuments to be complex. Complexity does not require permanence. It requires coordination, shared understanding, a rhythm agreed upon by many minds at once. In such a world, astronomy is not a science separate from survival. It is survival. To know when the rains come, when the animals move, when the sea breathes in and out, is to remain alive. Time is not abstract. It is felt in the knees, in the wind, in the angle of light at dusk. Memory is practical. Forgetting is dangerous. Geology offers glimpses of this world not through objects, but through conditions. Stable climate windows lasting thousands of years. Sea levels low enough to expose vast continental shelves. Ecosystem rich enough to support dense human populations without agriculture, as we define it. This was not a marginal existence. It was abundant. And abundance allows specialization. Some people watch the sky. Some shape stone. Some remember lineages. Some tell stories that encode more than they seem to say. Knowledge accumulates not explosively but steadily like soil forming from countless small deaths. What we call the forgotten epoch may have felt like a long present to those living inside it. No sense of beginning, no sense of impending end, just continuity. That is often how stability feels. Invisible. The Earth does not announce equilibrium. It simply holds. And humans adaptable and observant would have learned to hold with it. Tools refine, symbols emerge, not because of hierarchy, but because of meaning. A spiral scratched into rock is not art for art's sake, it is a reminder, a way to hold an idea still long enough for it to be passed on. This is where myth may have begun its quiet work, not as fantasy, but as compression. When knowledge grows too large to carry explicitly, it folds into story. A tale about a serpent becomes a lesson about cycles. A story of a sky teacher becomes a memory of learning. These stories are not entertainment. They are storage, portable, adaptable, resilient. They can survive migration loss, even partial forgetting, because their structure holds when details fall away. The forgotten epoch would not have ended with drama at first. Change begins subtly. The climate shifts its tone. Winters linger. Summers grow erratic. Rivers flood where they did not before. The sea pauses a little higher on the shore each year. To a geologist, this is data. To a person living there, it is unease, the kind that creeps in slowly enough to be ignored until it cannot be. The Earth is not hostile, it is simply adjusting. Gravity does not argue. Water does not negotiate. As conditions destabilize, the priorities of culture shift. Long projects become risky. Knowledge that assumes stability becomes dangerous. In such moments, forgetting can be protective, not erasing, but shelving. Knowledge is not lost, it is quieted, stored in symbol rather than practice, in myth rather than method. This is how an epoch can end without vanishing completely. Its material expressions sink or rot or are buried. Its cognitive patterns persist. Archaeology struggles here because the tools of archaeology prefer rupture. They look for clear transitions, new technologies, new diets, new settlement patterns. The forgotten epoch may not offer such clarity. Its end may have been uneven, stretched across generations, with different regions collapsing at different speeds. Some groups retreat inland, some adapt temporarily, some disappear. The record becomes patchy. Silence grows, and later, much later, when stability returns in fragments, what emerges feels new, because continuity has been broken. But the break is not total. It rarely is. The forgotten epoch leaves fingerprints in what comes after. A sudden fluency with stone, a familiarity with alignment, a reverence for cycles. These are not inventions ex nihilo. They feel like remembering, like muscle memory returning after long disuse. The hands know what to do even when the mind cannot fully explain why. Night is a good metaphor for this epoch, because night preserves without displaying. It hides detail but keeps structure intact. You cannot see the landscape clearly, but you know where you are. The forgotten epoch is night in human history, not ignorance but low light. Enough to move carefully, enough to survive, not enough to write everything down. If there was a first civilization, this may have been it. Not an empire, not a city of towers, but a coherent way of being that understood the Earth as alive, responsive, cyclical. A civilization defined not by domination, but by attunement. Its downfall would not have been moral failure, but misalignment. Knowledge advancing faster than environmental tolerance. Memory stretching further than stability allowed. When the reset came, whether by flood, fire, or cold, the forgotten epoch did not disappear. It exhaled. Its material body dissolved into sediment. Its memory retreated into story. Its patterns went dormant. This is not romantic loss. It is geological reality. Everything that lasts does so by changing form. As you rest in this idea, let it remain unfinished. The forgotten epoch does not ask to be proven tonight. It asks only to be imagined with care, to be felt as a presence beneath the surface of what we think we know, like bedrock beneath soil, like old stone beneath newer walls. Quiet, supportive, still there. The Earth remembers even when we do not, and sometimes that is enough to begin again. A reset does not arrive like an ending. It comes as a release. In geology, this release is called equilibrium, returning a system shedding excess energy the way lungs empty after a long-held breath. Mountains rise not to dominate the sky, but to balance pressure below. Ice advances not to punish life, but to redistribute heat. Oceans rise not to erase memory, but to find their level. The Earth does not reset with intention, it resets with necessity. And when it does, everything living on its surface must learn a new rhythm or fall silent. In the forgotten epoch, the reset would not have felt sudden at first. It would have announced itself through small betrayals of expectation. Snow lingering where it once melted cleanly. Rain arriving too hard too often, then not at all. Rivers thickening with silt. Animals changing their routes. These are not catastrophes. They are warnings written in weather. A geologist reads them in isotope ratios and sediment cores. A human reads them in anxiety in the sense that something once reliable has grown unpredictable. As instability grows, the Earth begins to move energy faster. Ice melts in pulses. Sea levels rise not smoothly but in jumps. Volcanic systems awaken as pressure redistributes. The planet exhales. What was held tightly during a long cold period is released into motion. Water once locked in ice returns to the ocean. Land that felt permanent becomes temporary. The coastline that most human of boundaries dissolves into memory. For people living through this, the reset would have been total but uneven. Some regions flood, others dry. Some freeze again after brief warmth. Survival becomes local and improvisational. Networks break. Knowledge that depended on stability fractures. In such conditions, the future narrows. Long-term planning gives way to immediacy. When the Earth breathes out this forcefully, it leaves little room for complexity that is not essential. This is where the idea of collapse often enters the story, but collapse is a human word. It implies failure. The Earth does not fail. It rebalances. What collapses are assumptions. The belief that the world will remain as it has been. The belief that tomorrow will resemble yesterday. The reset strips these away gently at first, then completely. What remains is raw relationship. Cold, hunger, shelter, fire, movement. In deep time, resets are not rare. They are punctuation marks in the long sentence of the planet. Mass extinctions, climate oscillations, magnetic reversals. Each one clears ecological space. Each one creates conditions for something new, but not immediately. There's always a quiet interval afterward, a recovery phase where life simplifies before diversifying again. Complexity returns slowly, like soil rebuilding after a landslide. For humanity, the reset would have meant forgetting, not because memory was erased, but because memory became dangerous. To remember how things were, how abundant, how stable could paralyze action. Nostalgia is heavy. In survival mode, lightness matters. Forgetting becomes adaptive. Not total forgetting, but selective. Details dissolve. Structures fade. What remains are shapes, stories, emotional truth distilled to their cores. This is why so many myths describe catastrophe as cleansing. Floods wash the world, fire purifies, ice renews. Ice. These are not moral judgments. They are emotional translations of reset. When everything familiar is stripped away, the mind seeks meaning in the loss. The Earth does not explain itself. Myth steps in to hold the explanation long enough for it to be carried forward. Geologically, the reset leaves signatures that are unmistakable. Meltwater pulses etched into coral. Sudden shifts in pollen indicating ecosystem collapse and replacement. Layers of debris deposited far inland by ancient tsunamis. These are not gradual transitions. They are moments when systems changed state. To a rock, this is simply reorganization. To a human, it is the end of a world. After such moments, the survivors would have lived in landscapes that felt newly made. Shorelines redrawn, rivers rerouted, forests recolonizing open ground. The sense of deep familiarity with place would have been broken. Place itself had become unreliable. This creates a psychological reset alongside the physical one. Identity once anchored to land must find new footing. Stories become portable homes. Ritual becomes structure. Rhythm replaces architecture. In this phase, humanity would not have been building civilizations as we recognize them. It would have been rebuilding coherence, teaching children how to read signs again, which winds bring storms now, which stars still mark the seasons. Knowledge compresses. What cannot be carried is abandoned. What can be carried becomes sacred. This is how certain ideas survive resets. Not because they're grand, but because they are light. The reset is also where hierarchy flattens. Complexity collapses inward. Leaders become guides rather than rulers. Skills matter more than titles. Memory holders become essential. Those who remember patterns, not details, gain importance. This is fertile ground for mythic figures. The wise elder, the sky watcher, the one who remembers how things used to align. These figures are not symbolic, they are functional. From a geological perspective, this is a brief moment, a few centuries, a millennium. From a human perspective, it is eternity. Entire lineages begin and end inside this interval. By the time stability returns, those who experience the reset directly are gone. What remains is second-hand memory, stories told by those who heard them from someone else. Each telling loses precision but gains resonance. The reset becomes a story of gods, not climate, of judgment, not physics, because that is how memory survives. The Earth meanwhile settles, ice retreats to new boundaries, sea levels plateau, ecosystems stabilize, quiet returns. This is the inhale after the exhale. The planet does not remember the reset emotionally. It only records it materially. Sediment layers flatten, forests grow, rivers carve new paths. Time resumes its slower pace. When humans begin building again in this calmer world, they do so with caution embedded in their culture. Alignment matters, cycles matter, balance matters. These are not philosophical insights. They are trauma responses encoded into worldview. Build in harmony or the world will correct you. This lesson does not need explanation. It is felt. It becomes moral. It becomes sacred. The reset then is not an interruption in the human story. It is a hinge. Everything before it bends toward forgetting. Everything after it bends toward remembering differently. Knowledge does not restart at zero. It restarts at symbol, geometry, ritual, story. The reset teaches humanity that permanence is illusion, but pattern endures. As night holds this thought, it softens its edges. The reset is not something to fear in the abstract. It is something the Earth has always done and something life has always survived by changing. The first civilization, if it existed, did not end in fire or water alone. It ended in translation. Its knowledge passed through pressure and emerged altered, lighter, quieter. What we inherit from a reset is not the world that was lost, but the instinct to watch carefully for the signs next time. After a reset, the past does not vanish, it reverberates. Not loudly, not clearly, but persistently, like a low-frequency hum travelling through stone long after the impact that created it. In geology, echoes are real. Seismic waves move through the Earth, reflect off boundaries, return altered, slower, diminished, yet still carrying information about what they passed through. Human history behaves the same way. What survives catastrophe is not form but pattern. Not instruction, but instinct. The echo is how memory continues when direct knowledge cannot. You can feel this echo in the body before you recognize it in the mind. Certain shapes feel right without explanation. Certain rhythms calm the nervous system. Circles feel complete. Symmetry feels stable. Proportion feels truthful. These reactions are not cultural accidents. They are inherited responses tuned over long periods of alignment with environment. The body remembers what the intellect forgot. Gravity is memory. It pulls understanding back toward what once worked. Architecture carries these echoes openly. Across continents and millennia, humans build in ways that mirror one another even when contact seems impossible. Stones are stacked wider at the base. Entrances face the rising sun. Structures align with solstices and equinoxes. These choices are often explained as symbolism, but symbolism is rarely arbitrary. It is compressed experience. An alignment that survives centuries does so because it mattered once, because it synchronized human activity with something reliable in a changing world. The echo of that reliability persists. The same can be said of agriculture ritual and daily habit. The way fields are divided, the way paths curve instead of cutting straight lines, the way thresholds are marked all carry traces of older logics. These are not innovations created from nothing. They are remembered solutions resurfacing in new contexts. Even when names change, function remains. The Earth teaches through repetition, and humanity learns by remembering what feels aligned. Genetics adds another layer to this echo. Trauma does not end with those who experience it. It alters stress responses, perception of threat sensitivity to environment. Populations that endured sudden environmental collapse may carry heightened attunement to warning signs, restlessness before storms, anxiety around water, reverence for fire. These traits, once adaptive, become cultural themes. Myths of floods and cleansing fire may be psychological fossils, emotional sediments laid down by experience too intense to articulate directly. Language itself vibrates with echoes. Words for time often double as words for cycle. Words for law overlap with words for order. In many ancient tongues, memory and truth are closely related. This is not poetic coincidence. It reflects a worldview shaped by repetition. When the world resets, what proves reliable is not novelty but recurrence. The echo teaches that what returns can be trusted more than what appears once. Even technology, which we imagine as purely forward-moving, carries backward resonance. The impulse to measure, to align, to calculate proportion, emerges early and returns often. Mathematics feels discovered, not invented, because it echoes structures already present in nature. The ratio that shapes a shell shapes a galaxy. When humans rediscover these relationships, it feels familiar, like recognition rather than revelation. The echo whispers that this path has been walked before. Consider how quickly complexity reappears after long periods of apparent simplicity. When conditions stabilize, knowledge seems to surface rapidly as if waiting. Stoneworking skills arrive fully formed. Astronomical awareness appears sophisticated from the outset. This is often framed as a sudden leap, but leaps require stored energy. The echo provides that energy. It is potential held quietly through disruption, released when stability allows expression again. Night is when echoes are easiest to hear. Without visual clutter, the mind tunes into subtle repetition. The sound of wind through trees mirrors breath. Waves repeat their pattern without variation. The stars trace the same paths they always have shifted, only slightly by time too slow to notice. In this environment, the idea of linear progress loses its grip. What feels true is continuity, the sense that nothing ever fully ends it, only changes tempo. The echo also explains why certain myths refuse to die. Stories of teachers descending from the sky, of golden ages lost, of a knowledge that must be earned again after catastrophe. These stories persist because they resonate with lived patterns. They feel plausible not because they are literal, but because they align with the structure of experience. When knowledge is lost and regained repeatedly, it becomes natural to imagine it arriving from elsewhere, returning after absence. In geology, echoes can mislead as well as inform. Reflected waves can create phantom structures, apparent features that are artifacts of signal rather than substance. Human memory behaves similarly. Over time, echoes distort, details blur, metaphor overtakes mechanism. This does not invalidate the echo, it complicates it. What survives is not accuracy, but direction. The echo points back towards something, even if it no longer shows it clearly. Cultural practices reveal this directional memory: initiation rites, seasonal festivals, cycles of fasting and feasting. These are not arbitrary traditions. They synchronize human behavior with environmental rhythms. Even when original reasons are forgotten, the practice remains because it regulates life in ways that feel right. The echo teaches without explanation. It guides through repetition. There is also an echo of warning embedded in these patterns. Overreach leads to correction. Excess invites collapse. Balance ensures continuity. These lessons appear in myth as moral judgments, but they are geological truths translated into story. When humans forget their dependence on stable systems, the systems respond. Not with intention, but with force. The echo carries this memory forward as caution disguised as narrative. Modern humanity is not immune to echoes. We feel them in our fascination with ruins, in our longing for lost harmony, in our suspicion that progress alone does not equal wisdom. These feelings are not reactions to history books. They are deeper. They arise from recognition, a sense that something essential has been misplaced before, and that we are capable of doing so again. The echo also lives in creativity. Moments of insight often feel like retrieval rather than invention. An idea arrives whole unannounced, as if remembered. Artists, scientists, builders describe this sensation across cultures and eras. The mind dips into something already there. Whether this is neurological patterning or cultural memory matters less than the experience itself. The echo speaks through intuition. If the first civilization existed, its most durable legacy would not be its tools or structures, but its patterns of thought. How it related sky to earth. How it balanced extraction with restraint. How it encoded knowledge to survive disruption. Those patterns once learned do not vanish easily. They linger in the way humans approach the unknown, cautious, curious, repetitive. As the night deepens, the echo becomes softer but clearer. It does not demand belief. It does not insist on names or dates. It simply repeats, a reminder that what has happened once can happen again. That memory does not need records to survive. It only needs resonance. The echo is not the past returning. It is the past continuing. At some point, after enough echoes accumulate, after enough anomalies refuse to settle, a different shape begins to emerge. Not a conclusion, but a curvature. The sense that history is not moving forward so much as it is turning. In geology, this realization comes early. Mountains rise and erode. Oceans open and close. Continents wander, collide, and separate only to meet again under different names. Nothing truly progresses. It circulates. Time does not march. It loops, widening slightly with each pass. What appears as change is often repetition viewed from a new angle. Human history resists this idea. We prefer lines, beginnings and ends, ignorance giving way to knowledge, stone tools evolving into satellites. But this preference is psychological, not geological. It reflects the short horizon of a single lifetime trying to make sense of a planet that measures itself in millions of years. When you stretch your perspective far enough, linear narratives begin to wobble. Patterns assert themselves. Civilizations rise in climates of stability. They fracture under rapid change. Knowledge condenses. Memory migrates. After a pause, complexity returns, carrying traces of what came before. The pattern is not neat. It never is. It is braided like a river seen from above, splitting and rejoining, abandoning channels and carving new ones through familiar ground. Some branches dry up completely. Others carry most of the flow. What matters is not the exact path, but the recurrence of motion. Water always seeks level. So does culture. So does memory. Geological strata illustrate this without commentary. A layer of rich soil indicates long stability. Above it, a sudden band of coarse debris suggests disruption. Then finer sediments return, signaling calm. This rhythm repeats across continents. The Earth does not remember specific events. It remembers cycles of stress and release. Human societies embedded within these cycles respond in parallel. Periods of expansion follow equilibrium. Periods of contraction follow imbalance. The pattern is not imposed from outside, it emerges from interaction. When ancient myths describe ages of gold, silver, bronze, and decline, they are not charting moral decay. They are intuitively mapping this pattern. An age of harmony gives way to complexity. Complexity accelerates extraction. Extraction destabilizes systems. Collapse follows. Renewal begins in smaller, quieter forms. The myth is not prediction, it is memory of recurrence. The pattern teaches by repetition because repetition is what survives. Once you see this, the scattered pieces of history begin to align. The forgotten epoch was not unique. It was one expression of a repeating structure. The reset was not an aberration. It was a phase shift. The echoes are not nostalgia. They are residual alignment. Each civilization that rises believes itself unprecedented. Each one in time encounters limits. The pattern does not care about belief. It responds to pressure. This perspective softens the mystery of sudden sophistication. Knowledge appears to re-emerge quickly after long silences because it is not starting from nothing. It is recombining fragments. Like crystals forming around impurities, new systems grow around old cores. Geometry resurfaces because geometry never left. It remained in stone, in habit, in intuition. Astronomy returns because the sky never stopped moving. Agriculture reorganizes because plants never forgot their cycles. Humans remember what the world continues to demonstrate. Night makes this pattern easier to accept. In darkness, the idea of forward momentum loses urgency. You become aware of breathing of repetition without progress. Inhale, exhale. The same motion, endlessly, new, endlessly familiar. The Earth breathes this way too. Ice ages inhale water. Interglacials exhale it back to the sea. Forests expand and retreat. Deserts wander. Life adapts not by escaping the pattern, but by moving within it. The pattern also explains why warnings are so often ignored. Each cycle feels unique from the inside. People believe their technologies exempt them from repetition. Tools change faster than instincts. But the pattern does not operate on invention. It operates on balance. When systems grow too efficient, too extractive, too confident, they amplify instability. The Earth responds not out of anger, but out of physics. Pressure seeks release, heat redistributes, water moves. Ancient cultures encoded this understanding without equations. They spoke of hubris, of forgetting sacred limits of gods, withdrawing favour. These are metaphors for misalignment. When humans exceed the carrying capacity of their environment, consequences follow. Not immediately, not dramatically, gradually, then suddenly. The pattern teaches patience and humility, lessons modern societies struggle to absorb because they unfold beyond election cycles and quarterly reports. Even science, which prides itself on novelty, circles back to this pattern repeatedly. Systems theory, ecology, climate modelling all describe feedback loops rather than straight lines. Inputs amplify outputs. Thresholds exist. Crossing them changes system behaviour irreversibly. This language is new. The insight is ancient. The pattern was always there, visible to anyone watching long enough. The idea of a first civilization fits into this framework not as an anomaly, but as an early loop. One turn of the spiral. Perhaps not the first in absolute terms, but the first whose echoes we still recognise. It existed in a window of stability, learned deeply, reached limits, and was translated through reset into myth and pattern. What followed was not ignorance, but reorientation. Humanity did not fall back to zero. It fell back to symbol. Symbol is the most efficient carrier of pattern. It compresses complexity into form. A circle holds infinity without explanation. A cross marks balance without words. A serpent coiled upon itself expresses continuity without chronology. These symbols reappear because they are stable attractors in human cognition. They resonate with how the world actually behaves. The pattern selects them because they endure. As you follow this line of thought, history becomes less anxious. The pressure to find beginnings eases. The fear of endings softens. What remains is movement, flow. The understanding that collapse is not failure but transformation. That forgetting is not loss but reformatting. Memory does not disappear. It reorganizes around what can survive. This does not mean the pattern is gentle. It is indifferent. Many suffer within its turns. Entire cultures vanish. Languages fall silent. Species disappear. The pattern does not preserve individuals. It preserves structure. This is a hard truth, but a clarifying one. It shifts focus from permanence to participation. To live within the pattern is not to escape change, but to recognize signals early, to move with cycles rather than against them. The night sky embodies this lesson quietly. Stars rise and set tracing paths that repeat with slight variation over thousands of years. Constellations shift imperceptibly, changing meaning while retaining form. People have named these patterns again and again, believing them fixed only to rediscover their motion. The sky teaches what the earth enacts. Stability is relative. Pattern is constant. If ancient myths are memories, then they are memories of pattern rather than event. They remember how the world behaves, not exactly what happened once. They teach through recurrence, because recurrence is the most reliable teacher. A flood story is not about one flood. It is about what water does when boundaries shift. A fall from grace is not about morality. It is about exceeding limits. A return of the gods is not supernatural. It is the return of coherence after fragmentation. Understanding this does not diminish the mystery. It deepens it. The pattern is vast enough to hold wonder without demanding belief. It does not ask you to accept a lost city beneath the sea. It asks you to notice repetition in stone, in climate, in story, in yourself. The same impulses rise. The same mistakes repeat. The same hopes reappear wearing different names. As sleep approaches, the pattern becomes less abstract and more embodied. Breath mirrors tide. Heartbeat mirrors season. Thought loops gently revisiting familiar ideas without urgency. This is the state in which patterns imprint themselves most clearly, not through force, but through resonance. The pattern does not end with us. It passes through us. Each generation occupies one curve of the spiral, contributing pressure, releasing energy, leaving traces for those who come after. The first civilization, if it existed, was not a destination. It was a phase, and so are we. In recognizing the pattern, the story does not close. It widens. Warnings rarely arrive as commands. They appear as shifts in texture, as changes in tone, so subtle they can be ignored for years before they become impossible to dismiss. In geology, a warning is a pattern, deviating from its long average. A river carrying more sediment than usual, a glacier retreating faster each season, a fault accumulating strain without release. None of these announce catastrophe. They whisper imbalance. The earth does not shout until it has already tried everything else. For ancient peoples, warnings would not have been abstract. They would have been lived sensations. A winter that refused to end. A summer that burned crops before they could seed. Fish arriving late or not at all. These changes do not feel like messages. They feel like uncertainty entering the body. Sleep grows shallow. Decisions feel heavier. Rituals intensify not out of superstition, but out of instinct. When systems become unpredictable, humans reach for repetition. Rhythm becomes anchor. Ceremony becomes calibration. Myths preserve this stage with remarkable consistency. Before the flood comes a warning. Before the fall, signs appear. The sky darkens. Animals behave strangely. The gods speak through dreams or omens. These are not narrative flourishes. They are memory structures encoding the experience of living inside a destabilizing system. When cause is invisible, meaning fills the gap. The warning must come from somewhere because the consequences feel intentional, even when they are not. Geology confirms that major transitions are preceded by signals. Ice cores show gradual warming before rapid melt. Sediment layers record increasing disturbance before collapse. Ecosystems destabilize before reorganizing. These precursors are real. They are measurable. The difficulty lies not in detecting them, but in responding to them. Systems resist change. Stability breeds confidence. Confidence dulls sensitivity to early signs. In the forgotten epoch, warnings would have accumulated slowly enough to be debated, dismissed, reframed. 1 bad year is weather. 2 is coincidence. 3 is concern. By the time patterns become undeniable, options narrow. This is not failure of intelligence. It is a feature of complex systems. Feedback loops lag. Perception trails reality. The earth moves faster than culture can adjust. This gap between signal and response is where myth intervenes. A warning told as story carries emotional weight that data does not. It bypasses argument. It embeds itself in memory. A tale of divine displeasure motivates change more effectively than a trend line. Not because it is more accurate, but because it aligns with how humans process threat. The warning becomes portable. It can travel beyond the generation that experienced the first signs. Many ancient myths emphasize the ignored warning. The people who laughed, the leaders who delayed, the builders who continued as if nothing had changed. This motif appears across cultures because it reflects lived frustration. Those who sense instability early often lack authority. Those with authority often benefit from the status quo. The warning then becomes moralized, not because morality caused the collapse, but because morality is how memory preserves the lesson. The Earth, indifferent to morality, responds only to physics. Water expands when it warms. Ice reflects sunlight until it melts, then accelerates warming. Forests regulate climate until they are removed, then amplify extremes. These mechanisms are ancient. They do not adapt to belief. They operate regardless of intention. When ancient stories speak of gods withdrawing protection, they are describing this withdrawal of buffering systems. Stability feels like favour. Instability feels like abandonment. Warnings also appear in architecture and alignment. When a society invests heavily in monuments tied to celestial cycles, it signals awareness of long-term rhythms. Solstice markers, horizon calendars, star alignments are not expressions of vanity. They are attempts to track change across generations, to notice drift, to catch warning signs early. These structures are tools for patience. They extend perception beyond a single lifetime. The presence of such tools suggests that some ancient cultures understood instability deeply. They did not assume permanence. They watched carefully. Yet even this awareness could not prevent reset, because awareness does not equal control. Knowing a flood is coming does not stop the water, it only shapes response. Perhaps this is why myths emphasize preparation over prevention. Build the ark, climb the mountain, save what you can carry. In this framing, the warning is not about stopping change, it is about surviving it with coherence intact. What matters is not preserving everything, but preserving enough. Seeds, stories, alignments. The warning tells you what to gather before movement begins. It focuses attention. It simplifies priorities. Night is when warnings feel most present. In darkness, small deviations stand out. A sound out of place. A shift in wind. The mind freed from daylight tasks becomes sensitive to anomaly. Ancient people likely discussed warnings at night around fires when observation and imagination merged. These conversations would have shaped myth long before catastrophe arrived. The warning phase is as much social as environmental. The difficulty is that warnings are ambiguous. They do not arrive labelled. They compete with hope. Humans are skilled at normalizing disruption. We adapt quickly to gradual change, recalibrating expectations without conscious decision. This adaptability is a strength in stable times. In times of accelerating change, it becomes a liability. The warning becomes background noise. This pattern is not ancient only. It repeats whenever systems approach thresholds. The difference is scale. Ancient warnings were local felt in weather and landscape. Modern warnings are global, abstracted through instruments and models. The psychological challenge is similar. How to respond meaningfully to change that unfolds slowly then suddenly. How to act before certainty arrives. Myths resolve this tension by collapsing time. They make consequences immediate. Ignore the warning and destruction follows quickly. This compression serves memory, not accuracy. It ensures the lesson survives. It also explains why myths often exaggerate agency. Gods speak clearly. Punishment is swift. The real world is less theatrical. It erodes rather than strikes. But erosion, precisely because it is quiet, requires amplification in story. The warning also carries a deeper implication. It suggests that collapse is not random, it is patterned. That it follows from misalignment rather than misfortune. This belief offers comfort. If collapse has causes, then future collapse might be avoided, or at least mitigated. The warning becomes ethical not because ethics control physics, but because ethics influence behavior within systems. Ancient societies encoded this as balance. Live within limits. Respect cycles. Do not take more than can be renewed. These principles are not spiritual abstractions. They are ecological truths rendered as values. When myths speak of punishment for excess, they are describing feedback loops. When they speak of renewal after humility, they are describing recovery phases. The warning phase is where the past speaks most directly to the present. not through prophecy, but through pattern recognition. The same signs appear: accelerating change, increasing volatility, diminishing buffers. The context differs, the mechanisms are the same. Water still seeks level, heat still redistributes, systems still collapse when stressed beyond tolerance. As sleep deepens, the warning loses its sharpness and becomes something else. Not fear, but attentiveness. The kind that does not panic, but watches. The earth does not demand alarm. It invites awareness. The warning is not a threat. It is information offered early, before response becomes impossible. If ancient myths are memories, then the warning is their most practical inheritance. Not a tale of doom, but a pattern to recognize. A reminder that change announces itself before it arrives, that listening matters, that coherence once lost is difficult to rebuild. The warning does not ask us to stop the cycle. It asks us to notice where we are within it. The sky and the earth have never been separate stories. They only appear divided because human attention is narrow bound to the scale of a single body standing on a surface. But in deep time, sky and stone are engaged in constant conversation. Gravity speaks upward. Light speaks downward. The planet tilts, wobbles, inhales and exhales, while the stars keep time without concern for names. To understand the memory of a first civilization, one must step into this dialogue, where what happens above leaves marks below, and what shifts below alters how the sky is read. Begin with the simple fact that the Earth is not still. Its axis slowly traces a circle, a motion called precession, completing one full turn roughly every 26,000 years. This movement is so gradual that no single generation can witness it fully, yet its effects are unmistakable over long spans. The stars that rise at solstice change, the pole star drifts. Seasons realign subtly against the background of the heavens. For anyone watching the sky carefully across generations, the sky itself becomes a record of time passing beyond human scale. Ancient structures aligned with stars and solstices are often treated as curiosities, expressions of ritual or symbolism. But alignment is a form of measurement. To align stone with sunrise requires observation, patience, and continuity. To notice drift requires memory that outlives individuals. These are not the behaviours of a culture unconcerned with time. They are the behaviours of people living inside long cycles, aware that stability is temporary and that orientation must be constantly renewed. Geology mirrors this celestial movement in its own slow oscillations. Ice ages advance and retreat in rhythms influenced by orbital mechanics. The sky shapes climate. Climate reshapes land. Land reshapes culture. This chain is not abstract. It is visible in rock. Glacial grooves etched into bedrock align with periods of reduced solar intensity. Sea level curves follow temperature curves, which follow changes in Earth's tilt and orbit. The sky sets the tempo. The earth dances. For ancient peoples, this relationship would not have been theoretical. It would have been intimate. The stars governed seasons. Seasons governed survival. When the sky changed its pattern, the earth responded and people felt the consequences in their bodies. Hunger, abundance, movement, rest. To track the sky was to anticipate the earth moods. Astronomy was not curiosity. It was preparation. Myths that speak of gods descending from the sky often reflect this dependence. The sky was not distant. It was active. It delivered light, heat, rain, and destruction. Comets, eclipses, meteors, these were not metaphors. They were events. Rare, unpredictable, and deeply unsettling. A bright object appearing suddenly in the sky could alter climate, ignite fires, or trigger floods through cascading effects. To witness such an event would sear memory deeply enough to last generations. Geology contains traces of these interactions. Impact layers enriched with unusual elements. Sudden climate shifts correlated with cosmic events. These are not daily occurrences, but they do happen. When they do, the distinction between sky and earth dissolves completely. What falls from above reshapes what lies below. Memory would not preserve the mechanism. It would preserve the awe, the fear, the sense that the sky had intervened. Beyond catastrophe, there is also harmony. The slow, predictable movement of celestial bodies creates rhythm. The moon governs tides, pulling oceans back and forth, shaping coastlines over millennia. This tidal breathing influences sediment deposition erosion and the distribution of life. Early humans living near the sea would have learned these rhythms intuitively. The moon was not distant, it was practical. It told them when the water would rise, when the shore would open, when paths would disappear. Stone monuments aligned with lunar cycles speak to this awareness. They are not romantic gestures, they are instruments. The sky was used as a calendar long before paper existed. When the earth reset, when coastlines drowned and rivers shifted, the sky remained reliable. It became the fixed reference in a moving world. To lose the land was devastating. To lose the sky would have been unthinkable. This may explain why so many ancient cultures placed knowledge in the heavens, not because they worshipped stars, but because the stars outlasted everything else. Empires fell, forests burned, ice advanced, but the constellations, though slowly changing, persisted long enough to anchor memory. The sky became the archive the earth could not guarantee. In a post-reset world, survivors would have turned upward instinctively. When the ground betrayed trust, the sky offered continuity. Aligning new structures with old stars would have felt like re-establishing connection with a lost order. Even if the land had changed, the rhythm of rising and setting remained. The sky did not forget. It simply moved slowly enough to seem eternal. Geology and astronomy converge here. Both teach humility. Both demand timescales that dwarf human concern. When ancient myths describe gods measuring the world, setting boundaries separating sky and earth, they are encoding this convergence. Measurement is the act of relationship. To measure is to connect. To align earth with sky is to remember that neither exists in isolation. The idea of a first civilization gains depth in this context. Such a civilization would not be defined by buildings alone, but by coherence across scales. Knowledge of stone and sky integrated. Architecture that mirrored cosmology. Calendars embedded in landscape. Rituals timed to celestial events that reflected ecological cycles. This integration is rare. It requires stability, patience, and long memory. When that coherence breaks, the sky and earth drift apart in human perception. Astronomy becomes abstract. Geology becomes technical. The intimate conversation is replaced by specialization, knowledge fragments. Yet fragments still resonate. A modern scientist mapping orbital cycles feels the same awe as an ancient skywatcher, even if the language differs. The echo persists. Night deepens this awareness. Lying beneath the stars, the body senses scale without calculation. The earth feels solid. The sky feels endless. Somewhere between them, thought slows. This is where the old integration can be felt again, not intellectually but physically. Breath matches tide. Heartbeat matches cycle. The separation dissolves. If ancient myths are memories, then the ski is their scaffolding. It provides the long baseline against which change becomes visible. Without the sky, resets would feel random. With it, they become patterned, predictable if not preventable. The earth resets in dialogue with the heavens, not in isolation. Modern humanity often imagines itself detached from this dialogue buffered by technology. But technology still obeys physics. Satellites follow orbits. Climate responds to solar input. The same forces apply. The only difference is perception. The sky has not changed its role. Only our attention has shifted. In this chapter of the story, the sky and earth reunite, not as symbols but as systems intertwined. The first civilization, if it existed, would have lived within this union. Its memory survives not because of monuments alone, but because the pattern it followed is still active. The sky still moves. The earth still responds. The conversation continues. As sleep approaches, let this connection remain simple. You are on a moving planet beneath a moving sky. Both are old. Both remember more than we do. And between them, life continues learning the same lessons again in different forms under familiar stars. The return does not announce itself with noise or spectacle. It arrives quietly like a familiar temperature on the skin, neither warm nor cold, but recognized. Somewhere deep in the body, beneath language and memory, there is a sense that something has been here before. The land feels known even when the names are gone. Stone ridges curve in ways the mind accepts without question, and the horizon settles into a shape that feels correct, as if it has always been waiting for us to notice it again. In geology, return is written into the planet itself. Continents separate and reunite, oceans open and close, mountains rise only to be folded back into the crust. Nothing truly leaves, it only changes form, sinks, subducts, resurfaces. What looks like disappearance is often storage. What looks like an ending is usually a pause. The Earth does not forget its shapes. It keeps them compressed, buried, waiting for pressure to release them back into daylight. Human memory behaves the same way. Knowledge does not vanish cleanly. It fragments, migrates, hides in habit and intuition. When people speak of rediscovery, what they often mean is recognition. A sudden clarity that feels less like learning and more like remembering. The return is not about recovering exact details. It is about re-entering a pattern that never stopped existing, only fell silent for a while. At certain moments in history, civilizations behave as if they are waking from a long sleep. Ideas appear fully formed, architectures emerge with confident precision, systems of thought arise that seem disproportionate to their supposed origins. Agriculture blooms across distant regions almost simultaneously. Geometry appears embedded in stone before it appears in writing. The sky is mapped again, not tentatively, but with assurance, as if the paths were already known. These moments feel less like invention than alignment, as though humanity periodically drifts back into resonance with something older than any single culture. The return does not recreate the past exactly. It adapts. It speaks in new materials, new symbols, new constraints. But the underlying rhythm is unmistakable. A slow inhalation after a long exhale. A settling back into coherence. Myths often describe this as the return of the gods, not in triumph, but in instruction. Teachers arrive after catastrophe. Knowledge descends when chaos recedes. The land is broken, the people scattered, and then guidance appears. Fire is given again. Crops are planted again. Stones are raised again. The mythic language makes this feel external, but the mechanism may be internal. Memory surfacing when conditions are calm enough to receive it. In the natural world, return is governed by thresholds. Seeds do not sprout until temperature, moisture, and light align. Rivers do not change course until pressure builds beyond resistance. Ice does not melt until energy crosses a precise boundary. Perhaps cultural memory follows similar rules. Perhaps certain kinds of understanding cannot exist in times of instability. They wait. They remain dormant like spores until the environment allows them to grow again. The end of the last ice age was such a threshold. The planet exhaled. Glaciers retreated. Sea level stabilized. Climate entered a narrow band of predictability. Only then did large-scale human societies reappear. Not immediately, but inevitably. The ground stopped shifting beneath every step. Time slowed enough to observe. Patterns could be trusted again. Memory found a place to settle. What returned was not a specific civilization, but a way of seeing. An orientation toward cycles rather than conquest. Toward alignment rather than extraction. The earliest monuments after the Ice Age are not fortresses. They are observatories, circles, pillars, places that measure light-shadow season. The return begins not with domination of the Earth, but with listening to it. This familiarity with the sky feels especially telling. The precision with which ancient sites track solstices and stellar risings suggests not trial and error but recollection. You do not need centuries of experimentation to mark the sun if the memory of its path already exists in story, ritual, and body. You simply need the ground to be stable enough to act on what you already feel is true. In this sense, the return is embodied. Knowledge lives in posture in the way hands stack stone in the instinct to align rather than randomize. It is carried through generations not as data, but as preference. Certain shapes feel right. Certain proportions feel calm. Certain rhythms feel complete. Long before they are explained, they are repeated. Even today, the return continues in subtle ways. Engineers rediscover ancient building techniques that outperform modern ones. Farmers return to crop rotations and soil practices abandoned in the rush of industrial certainty. Scientists circle back to holistic models after decades of reductionism. Again and again, progress curves backward not to regress but to recover balance. This is not nostalgia, it is correction. Systems pushed too far from equilibrium tend to oscillate back towards stability. Civilizations are systems. When they forget limits, they collapse. When they remember cycles, they endure. The return is the moment when memory reasserts itself as necessity rather than curiosity. There is often a feeling of inevitability surrounding these moments, as though humanity cannot help but rediscover certain truths no matter how many times they are buried. That gravity pulls objects together, that cycles govern growth, that imbalance produces correction. These are not philosophical ideas, they are physical realities expressed differently in each age. The return then is not the revival of a lost golden age, it is the reappearance of a deeper literacy, an ability to read the world again, to see stone not as inert but as time compressed, to see water not as resource but as movement, to see the sky not as backdrop but as clock. When this literacy returns, civilization stabilizes. When it fades, civilization accelerates toward collapse. Ancient myths often promise that the teachers will come back when humanity is ready. This readiness is rarely moral, it is structural. Are conditions stable enough for memory to take root without being weaponized? Are systems slow enough for wisdom to be integrated rather than exploited? The return does not arrive when it is desired, it arrives when it's survivable. In the quiet hours of the night, this idea feels less abstract. The world slows, signals fade, the body returns to rhythm, breath lengthens, thought softens. In these moments, the sense of having been here before becomes stronger, not as déjà vu, but as belonging. The same stars, the same gravity, the same long arc of time. Sleep itself is a return. Consciousness withdraws from immediacy and sinks back into pattern. Memory reorganizes. Experience sediments. What cannot be processed in daylight finds structure in darkness. The mind does not shut down. It cycles. It returns to foundational states where meaning is reassembled without effort. Perhaps civilizations sleep as well. Long spans of forgetting followed by sudden clarity. Ages of noise followed by moments of alignment. The return is not dramatic because it is natural. It follows the same rules as erosion, as healing, as rest. It is the system correcting itself. If ancient myths are memories of the first civilization, then the return is not about finding ruins beneath the sea. It is about recognizing when the same conditions arise again, when stability allows remembrance, when curiosity slows into attention, when building once again follows listening. The first civilization may have returned many times already, each time wearing different names, materials and stories. Its continuity is not architectural, it is cognitive, a way of arranging human life in resonance with forces larger than itself. Each return is imperfect, each cycle loses detail, but the core persists, and now once again there is a feeling of threshold. Climate shifts, systems strain, knowledge expands faster than wisdom. The old stories grow louder not as superstition but as warning. The return is not guaranteed. It depends on whether memory can re-enter without being distorted into control. The Earth does not rush this process. It never has. It waits. Pressure builds. Corrections occur. Life adapts. Those who listen survive. Those who ignore cycles exhaust themselves. The return belongs to those who slow down enough to feel it. In this way, the return is already happening. Not as a single event, but as countless small recognitions. A scientist noticing a pattern described in myth, an architect rediscovering proportions older than writing, a listener lying in the dark sensing that this story is not new. It has been told before, it will be told again, each time slightly changed, each time still familiar. The return is not behind us, it is underneath us, waiting patiently for conditions to settle, and when they do, memory rises, quietly, like stone emerging from melting ice. At the far end of the journey, the terrain grows quieter again, not empty but resolved. Like stone after heat or ash after flame, the world here feels settled into itself. Reflection is not an act of looking backward so much as it is an act of resting inside what has already been seen. The night carries this quality naturally. After long hours of listening, the body no longer strains to follow each idea. It simply floats among them. Knowledge loosens its edges and becomes atmosphere. Meaning stops asking to be held and instead asks to be inhabited. If there was a first civilization, its final legacy may not have been stone or script, but this exact sensation. The feeling that understanding does not arrive as conquest, but as alignment. In geology, equilibrium is never static. It is movement balanced against movement. Pressure held by pressure. Heat exchanged slowly enough that nothing tears apart. Wisdom may work the same way, not accumulation but proportion, not mastery but fit. To reflect is to allow the mind to settle into that balance, where curiosity no longer pushes forward and fear no longer pulls back. Throughout this journey, the Earth has not behaved like a backdrop. It has behaved like a participant. Ice remembered, stone listened, water carried stories across impossible distances. The past did not announce itself as a single truth waiting to be uncovered. It revealed itself as a pattern that repeats because it must. Civilizations rise where conditions allow. They fall when balance drifts too far. The cycle does not punish, it corrects. Tectonics do not hate mountains, they simply refuse to hold them forever. In this light, forgetting is not failure, it is function. Memory that lasts unchanged becomes brittle. Like rock that never fractures it, cannot renew itself. Erosion looks destructive only when viewed in isolation. Over time it creates soil. It prepares ground for something else to take root. The great forgetting, whether mythic or historical, may have been the earth-clearing cognitive space. A long exhale, a return to baseline. What survived did so because it was flexible enough to bend without breaking. That flexibility is what myth preserves. Not detail, but structure. Not dates, but relationships. When a story of a flood appears again and again across continents, it does not demand to be read literally or dismissed symbolically. It asks to be recognized as memory shaped for survival. Water rose. Land was lost. People remembered the feeling long after the numbers dissolved. The emotional truth carried the informational one like a shell protecting something fragile inside. Modern thinking often treats reflection as passive, as something that happens after the work is done, but in deep time reflection is the work. It is how systems recalibrate. After a volcanic eruption, ash settles, slowly altering soil chemistry for centuries. After a mass extinction, ecosystems reorganize around new constraints. After a civilization collapses, meaning redistributes itself through story, habit, instinct. Reflection is not an endpoint, it is a phase change. Seen this way, humanity now sits inside a familiar layer of the cycle, surrounded by data but hungry for coherence, able to measure almost everything but unsure how the measurements belong together. This is not new, it is an echo state. Other ages reach similar thresholds with different tools. The names change, the tension does not. Knowledge accelerates, wisdom lags. The ground shifts beneath certainty. Signals accumulate. Something asks to be rebalanced. The myths warned about this without equations, not because ancient people lacked intelligence, but because they spoke in the only language durable enough to cross collapses: story, pattern, rhythm. In those languages, reflection is built in. The hero pauses, the journey descends, the fire dims before it is rekindled. Even the gods retreat before returning in altered form. These are not narrative flourishes, they are maps of process. To reflect then is to recognize oneself as part of that process. Not as an observer standing outside history, but as a layer within it. We are not reading about cycles, we are inside one. Our technologies resemble memory. Our networks resemble oral tradition scaled to light speed. Our satellites trace patterns once carved into stone. The medium has changed. The impulse has not. The same desire to connect earth and sky past and future meaning and measurement continues to express itself. There is comfort in this realization, not because it promises safety, but because it restores context. A single human lifetime feels fragile when isolated. Placed within deep time, it becomes a meaningful pulse, a brief vibration contributing to a much longer waveform. Reflection stretches the present until it touches both memory and possibility. It allows anxiety to dissolve into proportion. Whatever rises will fall. Whatever falls will leave traces. Nothing is wasted. The first civilization, if it existed, is not something to recover intact. Its form is gone because form always goes. What remains is pattern, alignment, the sense that knowledge without balance is unstable, and balance without awareness is blind. That lesson does not need ruins to survive. It needs recognition. Each time a culture rediscovers the value of rhythm over speed, coherence over accumulation, it is remembering something ancient without knowing its name. In this quiet stage, the mind no longer asks whether the myths are true. It asks what they are still doing, why they persist, why they surface during moments of transition. The answer seems less intellectual than physiological. They regulate. They slow breathing. They widen perspective. They remind a species prone to urgency that it has lived through long nights before. Reflection is a biological response as much as a philosophical one. The Earth reflects constantly. Sediments settle. Magnetic fields reverse. Climate oscillates. Nothing stays fixed long enough to become absolute. Humans embedded in that system mirror it. Our stories oscillate between progress and lost control and humility. Each swing leaves residue. Each residue informs the next phase. This is not a flaw in history. It is its metabolism. At the end of reflection, there is no command to act, no instruction to rebuild the past or prevent the future. There is only acceptance, not resignation, but clarity. The understanding that remembering does not mean returning. It means integrating. The myths do not ask us to become Atlanteans again. They ask us to notice when balance slips. They ask us to feel the ground beneath abstraction, to hear time not as a countdown but as a tide, and so the story closes the way it began, in stillness, in atmosphere, in a night where the weight of stone and the distance of stars coexist without conflict. The first civilization, whether literal or symbolic, does not stand behind us as a lost perfection. It moves through us as a quiet constraint shaping how far we can drift before correction arrives. Reflection does not solve the mystery. It softens it. It turns the question into a companion rather than a problem. In this softened state, the mind can rest. The cycle does not need to be completed tonight. It never is. It continues through listening, through dreaming, through the slow acceptance that knowledge is not something we finish, but something we participate in. The earth breathes, memory circulates. The night holds everything without needing to explain it. And within that holding, the story remains alive, not demanding belief, only attention. We've reached the edge of tonight's journey, traveller. The long path through stone and shadow, through memory and deep time, now begins to soften beneath your feet. What you have listened to does not need to be carried forward in pieces or recalled in order. It was never meant to be stored like facts in a ledger. It has already settled where it belongs, beneath thought, beneath language, sinking gently into the quieter layers of the mind. The mind can release its grip now. The images, the rhythms, the echoes of ancient worlds do not need your attention anymore. They will continue on their own, like sediment drifting to the bottom of still water. You do not have to hold them together. You do not have to make sense of them. They have already found their place woven into the slow fabric of rest. In the end, traveller, it's all right to not understand. Understanding belongs to daylight. This hour belongs to letting go. Civilizations rose and fell without needing your certainty, and the earth continued to turn without explanation. You are allowed the same mercy. Nothing is being asked of you now except to be here, and even that can fade. Let gravity hold you. Let the questions fade. Feel the weight of your body surrender to the surface beneath you, the way stone settles after heat, the way dust returns to rest. Breath slows. Muscles loosen. The long story exhales through you and becomes silence. There is nothing left to search for tonight. The past can wait. The future can remain unnamed. What matters has already arrived in the only way it ever could quietly. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Tonight the universe whispers again. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch.